Curtis. I play guitar for the band Wrathskeller.
Mark Mitchell, drummer for Wrathskeller.
I'm Dan Turner. I'm the singer for Wrathskeller, former singer for Wrathskeller.
Got started in the band. Basically, I called Tom Reed, the other guitar player, and his band was having problems. My band was having problems, so I called him. We got together, and then we ended up calling Mark. So basically, me and Tom got together.
I'm from Dayton, Ohio, and I joined the band Wrathskeller in 1985. Randy and Tom, who lived across the street, came over my house, and they heard me playing drums, obviously, and asked if I wanted to jam with them, asked me if I was in a band. I said no, so I came over and we jammed, and that's how I got started.
I got in the band with Wrathskeller probably about 85 or 86. I had played with the band previously with my brother called Salem's Lot. They ended up going to Tennessee. I didn't move to Tennessee with them, so I ended up getting together with Randy. Randy and I have been friends for quite a long time anyway. In fact, I remember us investigating new Metallica on cassette and all this kind of stuff before Metallica was anything at all. But yeah, I joined around 85 or 86, and that's when we started getting the ball rolling.
Well, we started off with the name Battalion, and me and Tom were out running around one time. There was a bar that started up called the Wrathskeller, but it was R-O-T-H, and we liked it, and we changed, back in the 80s, and the Def Leppard thing, we changed the name and everything, so we made it Wrathskeller to make it sound more metal, basically. I would say we're pretty much power metal. We're not really prog or anything because we're not that technical. Really, we're influenced by everything we listen to. So we just tried to sound like our favorite bands, which at the time mine was Fates Warning and Queensryche. So we tried to stick to our favorite bands.
I'd have to classify the music as power metal, hook-laden, catchy, not too avant-garde or prog, as you'd say, mainstream metal.
I think Wrathskeller was good old school heavy metal. That's the only way I can say. I wouldn't say it was really progressive. Like old school heavy metal, like old Iron Maiden type riffs. Not too fast, not too flashy, just down to earth, hardcore, powerful stuff.
The theme we tried to stick with basically was the Dungeons and Dragons type thing. We were heavily influenced by Fates Warning, Queensryche, but then we also still listened to Slayer and stuff back then. But basically we stuck with the Fates Warning style. So it was mainly Dungeons and Dragons. Like our logo originally had, the S was a dragon pendant that we worked off of. And then the shirts we had, of course, had like a castle behind it. So we tried to stick with the basic theme that was going on back at the time. My inspiration comes from the guitar players I listen to, the music I listen to. I'm a big music fan, so besides playing, I listen. And truthfully, riff-wise, I'll just wake up with riffs in my head. Leads, solo-wise, a lot of times, truthfully, drugs. A lot of you sit around and it just happens, you know. You just think of something totally outside of the box that just you would never thought of. I'm not saying drugs are great, but okay, I am. But yeah, everything, truthfully.
Now, we could start back with Tommy James and the Shondells, but that's probably not one of them. But Humble Pie, Montrose, Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, Alice Cooper, that it started there, Kiss, and as things got progressively harder, I moved towards the harder stuff, but still didn't I was never a big Slayer fan, but I did like. I think these guys got me introduced me to King Diamond and Metallica and Megadeth, and I popped them on the turntable, if you can remember turntables, and I'm like, this stuff kicks ass, you know. So I started getting even heavier and got away from, I'll call some of it classic rock, but started moving heavy. And of course I like Judas Priest and Iron Maiden and Ozzy and all that.
I was real infatuated at that point with the lyrics I wrote with doomsday kind of stuff. Eve of the End, that idea actually it's a title to a Twilight Zone episode called Eve of the End. It's all about the end of the world, and people think the end of the world's going to happen, but it doesn't happen in the episode. And Dancing with the Dead, that's things like that. That was more like war-oriented. Witch's Hill actually came from, I was still a senior in high school, and we'd been studying the Puritans. And they explained how they would, accuse people of being witches, and they always had the one place where they took the witches up to burn them, and it was called Witch's Hill. And so I wrote it's kind of a snide comment on religion in that song, in their religion, saying, professing to be godly people, but then laying down all these set rules, that you had to do, and doing the witch hunts, pointing people out as witches. And that's where that came from. Circuits on Fire, like that song had to do with, I forget even what mission it was, but it was the mission where they shot them into space, and like 2 seconds after they took off, it exploded. I remember that happened, and then I was like, wow, I got to write a song about this. Because it was like they had a bunch of like normal everyday people on that flight. There was like a school teacher, and it was supposed to be some exploratory thing, and the minute they got in the air, the thing just exploded. And, that was also kind of a comment on NASA, and spending all this money just to have this disaster happen, and kind of a snide commentary on that too. It's always kind of cynical about things. Listening back to it now, I've discussed with Randy about this since its re-release and stuff, of re-recording this stuff more to this time period. Back then when I was singing, my whole thing was high, 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 high. Sing as high as possible. Just stratospheric. Listening back to it now, it's not bad, but like I can even barely understand the lyrics that I wrote. Randy came to me, he had asked me at one point, dude, can you help me with these lyrics? And I tried to listen to some of the old stuff, and I was like, honestly, dude, I don't remember what I wrote. And it was so way high up there that's what made it so hard to understand. If we ever re-recorded these songs, I'd like to at least bring down the vocals to a point where, of course, it's still going to be heavy, but bring it down to an understandable level. Of course, I thought Queensryche was the shit. I'd remembered hearing them on a thing from a radio station where they'll play like one track from a new band, and they had played Queen of the Right by Queensryche. And nobody knew who Queensryche was at this point, and you called up and gave your opinion, and I remember calling up the DJ, and I was like, these guys sound like Priest. I was like, man, who are these guys? And he was like, they're called Queensryche. They have this 4-song LP out right now. And I was like, oh, wow, that's a great new band. And then I think some of the other bands kind of followed suit after Queensryche, like Fate's Warning. But where Queensryche, was more of a straightforward band, Fate's Warning I mean, they almost reminded me of like a metal jazz band behind this singer because of their time changes and intricacies with that. But yeah, but my biggest influence ever, even to this day, and people hear stuff I record, you know, recently to this day and say, hey, sounds like Priest, and it's always like, you know, because there's nothing bad about Priest. Huge influence all the way around.
The writing process, basically, me and Tom would either come up with a riff or a complete song, and then we'd sit down and write it. But both of us usually brought ideas, one or two ideas to every practice, so we wrote a lot.
I basically just winged it, and if there was something that Randy or Tom, you know, suggested, I would go ahead and do it. But I would just kind of do whatever felt good, and there were, you know, a couple things that I would throw in every now and then, and I even asked, you know, got their input to see if, you know, what I was doing was okay, if it was, you know, they wanted to do something different. But there wasn't too many qualms like, you know, oh, that sucked, come up with something different. I just did what I felt was good, you know, for the song.
Lots of times they'd give me like the basic ideas. Randy and I have been in bands since then as well, and our writing process, we write very well together because he will come up with a riff or a couple riffs enough to make up a song, to complete a song, and he'll say, here you go, Dan, write something cool to this, write some cool lyrics to this. And I'd usually take that, and sometimes I'd switch around, like, maybe do this part a little longer, do this part a little shorter, but basically kept the whole thing together. And then when I write, I'll come up with the melody for the lyrics first before I write words. Because that's what really grabs people, is the melody of the vocals. So at first I might be writing a song and it'll be like burger and fries, you know, and then when I go write the lyrics, that will become real words. So that's basically the writing process as far as what we do, as far as that kind of thing. We come up with ideas, and if you don't record it, you can lose it just like that. And you'll come back the next practice and be like, what was that great riff we had, or that great song? And everybody will be like, I don't know. So we always made sure to record almost every practice so we could go back to it and go, yeah, that's what it was. Okay, cool. And that's the best way we could remember all that stuff.
Like rig-wise, of course, back then everything was Marshall. And then I started switching over to Jackson. Basically, I was a Charvel type guy. I loved Charvel guitars. The pedal board wise, DOD was big back then. So those pedals, you could stomp on them, they still worked. I'm pretty hard on my equipment, but I liked Charvel guitars basically.
I was basically a Ludwig man. Had a huge kit with Peisty cymbals. You could swing your arm pretty much anywhere and hit a cymbal. 2 bass, 4 toms, 2 floor toms, big deep dish snare. I had another kit, was a Yamaha kit, but I had that at the other house, but over at Tom's house, it was a pretty good sized Ludwig kit. Every other drum was black and white, so one white drum, one black drum, so on and so forth. But I pretty much, for the most part, my whole life been a Ludwig guy.
Mainly I'd always use a Shure 58. Before I got in with Wrathskeller, I was trained by a soprano in Dayton Opera. They say it's not over till the fat lady sings. Well, she was the fat lady, and I had taken her at the time I left Salem's Lot and went to Wrathskeller. I would take her tapes, actually, of Salem's Lot playing out live shows, just so she could see the type of thing I was singing. And she was really the only voice teacher I had that taught me the basics of it. Not the kind of voice teacher where you go in and they're like, well, we're going to warm up a little bit, we're going to sing this today, this song or that song. She taught me the ins and outs of the warm-ups, how to scream the right way without losing my voice. And I still have people to this day say, how can you talk after coming off stage and doing that? But it's your speaking voice and your singing voice are two totally different animals. So I would always do warm-ups, and you know, the band probably remembers me going in the back room doing this kind of crap, and bands have made fun of me about that for ages, but they knew what I was doing, and they were like, okay, cool. So I'd always do warm-ups. Back then, the equipment we had, it's not like PA systems are today. The speakers were like two big refrigerators on either side. Had a big board I ran through. Back then, none of us were exactly loaded with cash. So back then, for delay, I used a little guitar pedal that had delay on it. And I ran through that into the board, and that was our delays. You know, and we'd be writing original music, but at the same time, there was this other side of us that said, you know, we have to do these covers too, we have to play these covers. So I can remember us playing, you know, we'd have these heavy Wrathskeller songs, and then we'd like play a Tesla song or something and be kind of like, you know, but it was a real good time, and we had a lot of fun with all the recording and writing.
Basically, we had bass player issues throughout the entire thing of the band. At first, we had someone named Steve O, but he played for another band and he left, and then our bass player issue was just a revolving door. They'd come in, they'd be overwhelmed with the amount of music we had, and then Tom and I still wrote while we had a back catalog.
Did not have too many problems. I will reiterate what Randy said. Tom, every once in a while, would be, I'm going to use the word mope. You know, if things weren't going his way, he just kind of shut down. But other than that, Randy and I always got along. And again, there's the one problem that we had. Again, what he said is finding bass players. We could not keep a bass player. You know, for whatever reason, they just came and they went, and that was one of the problems I had was, you know, starting over, you know, and it's just, I mean, if you get the singer leaves, you got to start all over and find a new singer. Our problem at the time was mostly a bass player. I bet we went through 4 or 5, 6 bass players or more in a short period of time. It was disappointing.
I hate to go back to Tom Reed on this, but when we practiced at Tom's house, he was, I think Mark had mentioned this before, but Tom was kind of an unpredictable character. He was young back then. He didn't have much accountability for anything. That's the biggest struggle we had probably is with Tom. The practices were at his house. You know, sometimes we'd get over there, he'd be like, oh, I can't practice today. I remember for a while there, he had this slightly insane girlfriend. So that was part of his problem too. But that's the only real struggles I'd say we had at all. You know, nothing real huge or anything.
Really, a story I can remember is the last time we were in Columbus. It was Mark, myself, and Tom. We were hitting all the music stores, putting up flyers, looking for a singer, and we went to this, I needed to use the bathroom, so we went to this one little store that was in a strip mall. Tom stayed in the car while me and Mark went inside. You know, I needed to use the bathroom. The police came up asking Tom what he was drinking in his Mountain Dew can, and he was like, Mountain Dew, and they left. Well, meanwhile, on the inside, me and Mark were sitting there in the back room with the girl. She was giving us beer and flirting with us. He was like, what took you guys so long in there? And we were like, nothing. That's about it.
I would say the funniest thing that I saw was, and again it deals with Tom, that he treated his guitar, he had a nice, I think it was a pink Charvel, some type of guitar, and he just treated that thing like crap. He was always banging it around, and I just like, how can you do that to your guitar? That's what you play, you know, how can you treat it like that?
Back to funny Tom Reed again. Tom, we always used to tease him. And he's the only guitar player I've ever known that has used this crap at all. But it's this stuff called finger ease. And it's you spray it on your neck, and it's supposed to, you know, make your fingers dance across the strings. And but he just overused this stuff. It's like somebody who's like obsessive compulsive with hairspray. He would never clean his neck, so this stuff would build up, and he'd be like, "Oh, it makes it more grungy." It's like, yeah, it makes it grungy, but not the tone. It just makes your neck grungy. So he'd never wash his neck. And at one point, a friend of ours, he had a body of I forget what kind of guitar, but it was like a white guitar. He had a friend of ours tie it to a chain and drive it down the road and beat it all up, you know, drove it for like a mile down the road, dragging the body of his guitar. And so after that, I remember, I think a couple of us like cut ourselves or something and rubbed blood on it too after he got done with it. And then he actually connected it to a neck after that and played it a couple times, but it was screwed after that.
Played at a place called Bus Stop. It was like a battle of the bands with Neon Knights, which had Daryl Roberts, who was in My Friendly Death Punch and Wasp. We played that. We played a private party at Mark's basement house after we got Dwight Bowden in the band. Truthfully, that's about it. We were mainly a writing band because we had so many bass players coming through. It's hard to get a show without bass player.
CD motels and strip clubs. No, just kidding. I just remember playing a couple parties. We even like kind of hosted a couple parties where we practiced. We brought some people down. Mainly we were so intense on, I guess, becoming rock stars that we shied more away from, like I mentioned before, we did play the cover songs, but I don't think any of our hearts were really in the cover songs. It was more of a, people will like this, so let's do these cover songs. So for the fact that we didn't play a lot of cover songs, I think lent itself to us not wanting to play out a whole lot. And we're much more into, rather than say we have a gig playing, a whole cover of Rat songs next week, we would say, hey, we got 2 new songs here, and let's work on these, and let's think about where we can go to record these songs. So it came down to writing and recording, like I said, our overwhelming need to become rock stars.
Really at rehearsals, we were pretty closed. Our girlfriends would stop by every once in a while. Daryl Roberts used to hang out a lot. Really the only problems we had at rehearsal would be Tom Reed. He's very set in his ways, and when we would try to offer changes, he would refuse a lot of times and pretty much stand by his hand and not play the songs. And we would pretty much just, okay, whatever, what's next? And just keep going. And that would kind of sometimes make it worse. But truthfully, we got along pretty good. We didn't, Tom didn't drink a lot, so we didn't do a lot in his house. We pretty much practiced in Tom's basement. His mom and stepdad had a house. When we broke up, his stepdad pretty much kicked him out, but we were pretty much the whole time in Dayton, in Tom's basement. We have had the cops called on us quite a few times, though. One new neighbor moved in, and apparently didn't like us. So.
I remember practicing a lot in the basement, 3-4 times a week, and then when I moved to Bellbrook, and we, with the newer version of the band, played a lot over in the basement down there. Believe it or not, my kids at the time, who were just little guys, they were so used to it they could sleep right through it, and it was loud. It was deafening in the basement. You'd come up out of the basement, and your ears were like, they were ringing, and my kids just, they were asleep. I'm not sure if you'd call it a funny story, but it was kind of nice when I bring a girlfriend, or girlfriends or friends would stop over and, you know, come down in the basement to hear the onslaught of the volume, because in Tom's basement I think it was even louder, and for them to have to suffer through the intense volume in the basement was, you know, I gave him kudos for that. But it was nice having friends come over. I'd invite them over and they'd check out the practice, and, you know, so they wouldn't stay the whole time, but they'd stay for as long as they could physically stand it, you know, until their ears were bleeding, and then they'd have to leave. As far as I know, the only places that we practiced were in Tom's basement. I think possibly for a brief stint we practiced in my basement. Different version of the band, different songs. I think we were writing a little bit more progressive stuff. There were some time changes in that particular group. I think that's when we had Dwight and maybe Chris Motter. I'm not sure if we'd even had a name at that point, but it only got so far. Then I think we took that version of the band. I moved down to Pembroke, and we added a guitar player and played there for a while. But the band, I don't think, as far as I know, ever got out and played. If we did, it's, I mean, again, not a memory that's lodged away. Yeah, we did play a party. There was a party, and played a lot of, in addition to original tunes, we played a lot of Megadeth. Did we play some Armored Saint? We played some Armored Saint. A lot of heavy stuff, but it was all, you know, stuff that we liked.
I'll bring it up again. Tom was a weirdo. I mean, he and a big thing I remember about him, he is one person I remember that drank more Mountain Dew than anybody I've ever met since then or before then. I thought at one point we were going to have a Mountain Dew intervention with him, get him to lay off the dew, because this guy would probably run through like a couple 12 packs a day. Kidney stone waiting to happen. But that was pretty funny how he'd always have a Mountain Dew in his hand. And he would also, I remember, he used to pitch fits at practice sometimes. He would, all of us would be working on something, and he'd get pissed about something. He'd take his guitar and throw it on the floor and walk out. He'd go upstairs to decompress for a few minutes. We'd be sitting down there going, "Come on, man, come on. We're sorry, all right? We're sorry we called you gay or whatever we said. We didn't mean it." And finally he'd come back down, you know, he'd decompress. But he was a character. It was kind of like having a little kid for a guitar player. But he did the job.
Demos we released really didn't have titles. The first one was called Rainbow Recording, because that's where we put the vocals on at. The first tape we did was without vocals. It was 4 songs. We did it so we could get a singer, and that's what we came up to Columbus for. We had the tape, put flyers up, put ads up. After that, once we got Dan in the band, we went ahead and went to Rainbow Recording, put the vocals on those 4 songs. So that was our second demo. Third demo we did in our practice place, and Tom's with Dave Fella recording it, which I did the bass on my songs, Tom did the bass on his songs. After that we went down to recording workshop. That's when me and Dan recorded, so we had a professional 4 to 5 songs professionally recorded. And before that was Dwight Bowden. We also recorded in Mark's other basement when Tom left the band. We did move from one practice place to Mark's house. So we moved from there, and we got Dwight, and we recorded like 3 songs down there. Some of the songs, a lot of the songs we never released because we just had so many songs. We had like 40 songs by the end of 2 years, so we did a lot of recording. The original lineup, Tom pretty much decided he wanted to be Guns N' Roses. Me and Mark decided we wanted to move on with what we were doing. That's when we got Dwight and everything. After Dwight, there was a span because me and Dan just couldn't decide if we wanted to use the name or not. And we decided, since we're using the same songs, I just wrote the music, he wrote the lyrics, we decided why not go ahead and reuse the name. So that's why there's spaces in between recordings and stuff. When I was initially approached by the label, it was for another band, Shadowcast, and they didn't have enough music for a full album, so he inquired about my past bands. In one band, he saw the photos for Wrathskeller, saw the hair, and he inquired and said, I'd like to hear some of the music, and instead of a couple songs, I gave him 20 songs. And he liked all of them and decided, I have to release all of these songs, which I had no issue with because they were just sitting around collecting dust.
I do have a 4 song cassette of Wrathskeller from when we recorded in Tom's basement, and then I have another 4-song cassette of the same songs with vocals added. But that's the only thing that I remember recording on. There's even some video footage that Randy sent me that I looked at it. I'm like, that's me on there, but I don't remember that song. And then I heard some other songs, and I'm like, yeah, now I remember that. I remember certain songs. Those are the only recordings I have, with the exception of this right here, which Randy just laid on my hands. So I'm anxious to hear what it sounds like on a CD player.
The main demo we did, because we were wanting to go very professional, was at Recording Workshop in Chillicothe, Ohio. Back then, it was a great professional setup. That was back in the day of reel-to-reel tape and that kind of thing. That was where we had the first really professional recording. Before then, we did some things at Rainbow Studios, which wasn't too bad. The owners were like porno filmmakers, but aside from that, it worked out okay. It was very cool to go in there. It was a little studio and a little strip mall, and I remember very vividly us recording there, and I think that was the first time we all went into an actual real studio, was Rainbow. But when it got to the more professional level was when we went to Recording Workshop and got, in my opinion, better recordings with Recording Workshop.
Most of our demos, we never really had artwork because they were, like the one demo was for vocalists, so they were pretty much just the song titles written on the covers. Any of the covers that were made, I made by hand because I was a kid back then. I sat down, made covers for my friends and stuff. The cover on the album, the label Ark and Steel and Costas himself decided to go with Caldas Art. I forget Chow's last name, but he is a Brazilian artist, does Dragon Force, Doro, and he decided to go with them. Pretty much when the label picked up the music, they decided everything on the artwork, the cover, everything. And pretty much the music was up to me. But yeah, I love that artwork, but it's the first time we've had real artwork on any of the music, so I think it's awesome.
After Wrathskeller, or the most current version of it, disbanded from in Bellbrook, there was a brief stint where I probably was just not playing with anybody. Then a bass player that had played with us briefly, Steve Smith, rest in peace, called me up and wanted to know if I wanted to. He had a couple guitar players. They're looking for a drummer, and so they're really hot, and so they came over and we jammed in the basement. And he was right. They were super hot, and I went on to join those guys, and that band became Paragon, and we have 2 demos from that, which was recorded, I think, in downtown Dayton, over off 2nd Street. That was the last thing that I did. I probably was with Paragon for 2 or 3 years, and then finally, due to the same problems that a lot of bands have, the singers and bass players, and it's starting over, and it got to be to where I wasn't making any money, and my kids were getting older and starting to grow up a little bit, and had to make a life choice. So I kind of bowed out of the drumming thing, and then Randy got a hold of me several years back and informed me of this, and kind of told me what was going on, what he had did with it, and I said, that's great, any exposure, we can get out there. It'd be great to have our music out there to where everybody can hear it. So that's great.
Salem's Lot, they had some interest going on in Nashville. So I believe that's when I went to Nashville. I think that is when they brought Dwight in, after I went to Nashville. And that's when Dwight came in and started doing recording and writing and things like that with the band. Of course, later on in life, everybody gets sucked back into Ohio somehow. And I ended up moving back to Ohio. I can remember first thing when I got back to Ohio, I was staying with my mom briefly because I had to kind of leave out of an emergency from Nashville. And that was back really even before cell phones had really come into existence. And I looked up Randy in the phone book, and I remember his wife answering, and I said, is this the Randy Davis that plays guitar? And she said, well, yeah, he still does. Is this Turner? And I said, yeah, this is me. And I talked to Randy, and then he and I reformed. I guess we started playing in a band again, and I was probably 31 then. And then we played in bands again for years and years, up till about, I'd say 4 years ago or so. We were in, the last band we were in was Muggsy Croftshire together. We recorded CDs as that band. Before that, we were in Rat Bastard together. We recorded a couple CDs as that band, but that was all Randy and I, and we were still, basically it was Randy and I writing almost all the material too for those bands. So we've been writing and recording for many, many years. I'm just at the point now I'm trying to snatch him back in to jam with me some, so.
What I learned from that band pretty much was how to deal with other people, other band members. Since we did have so many different bass players come in, we had so many different personalities come in and come through the door that you have to deal with everybody and everybody's ego. And we're musicians, everybody has an ego. But what I learned from it was how to deal with people, better myself as a musician, to make sure when I'm at practice, because a lot of these people came in and didn't even know their parts. What I learned from it was, if I step into an audition, know your parts and just better yourself.
I'd say one of the things I learned the most that to be in a band with 5 other, 6 other people, however many people, is that you have to learn to live with those guys, especially if you're around each other all the time and everyone's different, and you have to be, nice to each other and listen to each other. If they have certain ideas, you just can't, shut them down. The music business is a hard business, and if you're not willing to give it, 100%, there's so few bands that actually get out there and really make it. But if that's where your heart lies, then go for it. I know a lot of people. I've got some friends that have made it, and I've got some, 1,000 other friends that, haven't, but there's a lot of them that are still playing, and I'm like, go at it. I don't actively participate anymore, but I still am an avid follower of rock and metal and stay well versed in the metal scene.
I think it's great. I think no matter what you've done in the past with bands, I think that's a great thing to have. I think it's like a painter having a painting they've painted and say, look at this painting I've painted. It doesn't matter when they painted it, really. but I like that some interest has come back around. Um, Overseas and such, they've always been, I don't know how to put it. They never morphed into, metal has morphed in the United States now to all metal is growling and crap like this, and to the point where the guy in Mastodon saying priest is not metal and things like this. So it's kind of morphed into that thing, and they've said, well, that's what metal is now. I think metal has many different faces, and it depends. These days, I can growl like the best of them, but I prefer people that growl and sing and can do, you know, either which way. But the fact that you have that recorded, that can always be there for somebody else to hear and generate interest. I think overseas they've remained a little more refined, and where they still like the newer stuff, they haven't thrown away the older stuff. And I think that's what's kind of happened, especially in the States, because, you know, in the States now we have, like I said, like some guy from Mastodon saying priest isn't metal. And, you know, that's just the mindset. But I think people, especially people overseas, are more open-minded. They don't want to compartmentalize every different kind of metal. They're like, I like this kind and that kind and this kind, and this is heavy too. And that's how I kind of feel about it, as far as that goes.
After Wrathskeller, I joined a band called Shadowcast, which had a couple members from that used to be in Wrathskeller. When we did that, Shadowcast, we recorded a couple of demos. We were trying to truthfully get signed by a label. That release us out today is with the label that Wrathskeller is on, because everybody was connected. The thing about Shadowcast and Paragon is we're kind of interconnected to where after Mark and Dwight left Wrathskeller, they joined Paragon. Well, when Shadowcast broke up, the singer Nathan Bai and drummer Jay Stevie ended up replacing both Mark and Dwight in Paragon. So pretty much everybody knows each other. Like in Dayton, Ohio, the scene nowadays, all the bands know each other, we help each other out, and it was the same back then. We all knew each other, so it was just easy, you know, pick up from one band, pick up to another.
After the demise of the Wrathskeller, or the formation that was down in Bellbrook, I'm not sure that the time span that occurred, but the bass player, Steve Smith, who's no longer with us, rest in peace, Steve. He had played with Wrathskeller briefly, and he called me up out of the blue and said, hey, we're looking for a drummer. I'm in this band up in Springfield, Ohio, and there's a couple of hotshot guitar players, and he said they're really good. And I play with a lot of guitar players. I, you know, listened to a lot of music. I knew who was good and who isn't. He said one of them is 17, one of them is 19, and they're just like hot shots. I'm like, yeah, right. So we came across, they came up with a list of songs that, you know, we could all play together, and so they came down to Bellbrook. I don't think there was no vocalist at the point, so it was just Steve. The guitar player, one guitar player was Keith Wood, and the other guitar player is John Faber, both from Springfield. And the real young guys, I mean, like almost fresh out of high school or getting close to it, and long, cool looking, big hair and everything, and nice equipment, Marshalls and nice guitars, and just while they were tuning up and plugging in and getting warmed up, I'm just like, these guys sound pretty good. So we played some Megadeth songs and a couple other songs, and I have to say, I was quite impressed. Steve was right; they were hotshot guitar players. And one guy, it was John, was 17. He'd been playing for like 3 years, and I'm like, how can you learn to play that good in 3 years? They were just phenomenal. And Keith had been playing since he was like 18 or 19. He'd been playing since he was like 10, and it was like a young Yngwie Malmsteen. He was just incredible. So we played there that one time, and then I think we had I can't remember where we practiced. We had practiced up in Springfield someplace at a place at Cary Hall maybe, and it was like a big building with lots of stairs and practice rooms, and so that's where I ended up taking all my drums. I still had a drum set in the basement, and the writing style of Paragon, well, the name of the band, we had not come up with the name yet, but the writing style, it was more progressive metal, but still radio accessible, heavy. Didn't have any vocals yet, but we ended up getting a vocalist, Dwight Bowden, who had played down in Bellbrook. I made that suggestion at a certain point when we get him in the band. He came up, and that worked out, pretty good. We had a backer. His name was Dusty, and he was kind of like the money man. And we recorded two demos, but two, back then, cassettes, two recordings. One was Heed the Prophecy. The name of the band was Paragon, and the second one, which was made maybe a year and a half later, was called Change of Seasons. And we made like 200, 300 cassettes, and they were all sold, so they're out there somewhere, hopefully not in the trash. Probably a collector's item. I've got my 1 or 2 copies at the house. You can find the material on YouTube. You can put Paragon Springfield or just Paragon, and you'll find them on YouTube. And I was pretty proud of those. I still listen to them every now and then, and I'm like, some of those songs kicked some ass from back then. And I think subsequently, possibly, it'd be nice to see him, put on a CD. In fact, at one point in time, I got a phone call or a text from John Faber, who was since then, and now he's like an attorney over in Indianapolis someplace. He still plays guitar. Keith still plays, but they're doing other things. They have careers too. They're not really in the music business, but someone had interest in putting the material out on CD, but it never came to fruition. I hope that someday it probably could. I'm not sure what the problem was. Maybe it was they had a problem getting the master tapes from the manager, Dusty. And I was with Paragon for maybe 3 years, and finally got to a point in my life where, band members come, band members go, and wasn't really getting where I wanted to in the music scene, and by this time had a wife and had a family and young kids, and I just found it was the opportune time for me to bow out and let someone else step into the limelight.
I can remember in Salem's Lot, there was a band that came out a couple of years after we were gone, and people would say, is that the real Salem's Lot, which was me and my brother and a couple other players in the band. And we used to say, no, that isn't the real Salem's Lot, and they had pictures of these guys, and they were just kind of a scrawny bar band. But my brother had contacted Stephen King and got back a letter with the letterhead that said, from the desk of Stephen King. It was written by a secretary. He signed it, and it said, we have read your request to use the name. Stephen is a big fan of rock and roll himself, he said that it's fine to use the name and wishes you the best of luck. And to this day, I know my brother has that stashed away somewhere, and I've been trying forever to get him to at least make me a copy, just because it'd be something cool to have. But as far as actually having the permission to use the Salem's Lot name, we got it way back when. Salem's Lot was a lot like a New Age Iron Maiden. Very Iron Maidenish. Kind of like Iron Maiden with Priest vocals. It touched on a lot of darker themes, satanic, some people might call them, if you will, but darker themes about things like that. And we got caught in the cover wrap-up thing too, but Salem's Lot ended up actually coming to an end after we were recording in a large studio in Nashville, and I believe it was our bass player that had to argue with the producer. And when somebody's putting money into your music, you should try to play it however they want you to try to play it. And he argued with this producer one night, and we were never back into the studio after that.